Right, so the Ottoman Empire, right, begins in the Anatolian Peninsula, modern-day Turkey, conquers the Bosphorus and Dardanelles, giving it access to Europe. Then it conquers the Balkans, where it gets its Janissaries from. Then it conquers Constantinople, ending the Byzantine Empire. Then it conquers Egypt, Arabia, Mesopotamia, giving it control of Medina, Mecca, and Jerusalem. Then it conquers North Africa. Then it conquers more of Europe, conquers Hungary, but is eventually stopped at Vienna. So to give you a visual representation of the changes of the Ottoman Empire, its evolution, starting in the 1300s, it just began to grow and grow and grow and grow until it became a massive, wealthy, powerful empire. Now, the way it was structured is one reason why it was successful. The ruler of the Ottoman Empire was titled a sultan. He's like the king, the emperor of the Ottoman Empire. And in theory, he controls all the land and he has all the power. He's also supposed to be like the religious leader as well, kind of set the example for the people. And he lives in a palace just like a European king. Now, part of that palace was the harem. That's where his wives would stay, and he could have multiple wives. According to Islam, the sultan, the ruler, could have multiple wives. And so the harem was literally almost like a sacred place. That's what it translates into, sacred place. Only the sultan and a handful of chosen servants and guards were allowed into the harem where he kept his wives and where his children would grow up. Now, he would want multiple sons, but remember, in the Ottoman Empire, the throne did not necessarily go to the eldest son. It went to what was hopefully the best son. That could be the eldest son, the second son, the third son, the fourth son, the 10th son. And this was a vicious competition because if you became sultan, to maintain stability within the empire, you were expected to have the rest of your brothers executed. That way they wouldn't be rivals for your throne. So the harem, it was a place full of intrigue. It was a very Machiavellian place because if you were a mom and you had a son, you wanted your son to win, right? Because if not, your son would die, right? So rivalries could be very intense in the harem between wives, between sons, because you knew the consequences if you lost. Now, the Sultan relied heavily on his chief advisor, the Grand Vizier. Right? He's kind of like second in command, the Sultan's right hand man. Because oftentimes the Sultan did not deal with government officials directly, he dealt with them through the Grand Vizier. And underneath the Grand Vizier would be a royal council, right? And the meetings of the royal council were pretty interesting. The Sultan did not deal directly with the royal council. The Sultan actually would sit behind a screen, communicate with the Grand Vizier, then the Grand Vizier would pass along the wishes of the Sultan, the orders of the Sultan to the royal council. And underneath the royal council, you have the pashas, which if you recall from our first video, and this system works really well as long as you have a really good Sultan like Suleiman the Magnificent in charge, because leadership starts at the top. If you have a sultan who's not concerned with the empire, then maybe he has a grand vizier who's not concerned, and a royal council who's not concerned, and then no one's watching the pashas, and then the pashas become corrupt, and so then that's what's going to happen. They're going to have a series of really bad sultans, and this Ottoman Empire is going to slowly die from the inside out. So the way the power was structured in the Ottoman Empire was like a pyramid, right? Where the Grand Vizier and the Sultan, Royal Council, bureaucrats, they all had their place. So if you're doing notes at home, pause it here, draw the pyramid, and put those people where they belong in the pyramid of power. So you have the Sultan on top, underneath him the Grand Vizier, underneath him the Royal Council. Underneath the Royal Council you have your bureaucrats, your non-elected officials, the pashas. Right? Now, when it came to religion, the Ottomans followed a branch of Islam called Sunni. Not all Muslims believe the same exact thing. You have two main branches of Islam, Sunni and Shia. It's kind of like Catholic and Protestant in Christianity. And just like at times Catholics and Protestants have fought each other, Sunnis and Shias fight each other as well. So they followed Sunni Islam. Now, in theory, the Sultan is in charge of the religion. In practice, it was the ulmas that were in charge of religion. They were in charge of teaching and educating Islamic law and enforcing Islamic law in the Ottoman Empire. Now, to live in the empire, you did not have to be Muslim, though. The Ottomans were actually highly tolerant of non-Muslims, particularly of Jews and Christians, what the Quran calls people of the book. If you were a Jew or a Christian inside the Ottoman Empire, really all you had to do was pay an extra tax, a religious tax, which the Quran instructed that would be so, and that was pretty much it. Sometimes Christians even had high positions within the government. There are even cases where the royal doctor to the Sultan were Christians. Think about how important that is. You're in charge of the health of the ruler of the empire, and you were a Christian. And so at the same time, in Europe, Christians were killing each other. Catholics killed Protestants and Protestants killed Christians. So it was a highly tolerant empire at its best. Now, by the end of the empire, it dropped that tolerance, right? I think there's something to be said for that. Tolerance is almost always the best option. Now, Ottoman society itself was rigidly divided into occupational job groups, where you had your peasant farmers, and you had your artisans, your craftsmen, your merchants, who had a lot of power in the Ottoman Empire because they made the Ottoman Empire a lot of money, and your pastoral peoples, nomadic herdsmen that you would see in different parts of the empire, particularly in North Africa, right? So very rigid. It's very hard to move up and down, right? Usually whatever you were born into, that's what you were. If you were born in a merchant family, that's what you became. If you were born into a farming family, that's what you were. It was not a very mobile society when it came to rank, not like modern day America where you could be born one thing and end up something else. It's a very structured empire. Now with the role of women, right, ladies, this is where you'd want to live, actually. In the Ottoman Empire, you had the right to own property. You could inherit property. You could not do that in Europe, by the way. You even, under certain circumstances, ladies could get a divorce in the Ottoman Empire. You could not do that in Christian Europe. We often associate, in the West, unfortunately, we often associate Islam with the oppression of women, and that's not always the case. It depends on the particular culture. In Ottoman culture, it was Islamic, but Ottoman women had a lot of power and influence within the empire, particularly the Sultan's mom had a lot of influence within the empire itself. So we have to be very careful of painting an entire religion with broad strokes, saying, oh, all Muslims are like this. That's like saying all Christians are like this. Of course not. That's silly. You have to take each culture and each member of that religion on a case-by-case basis and don't rush to judgment. Now, after the death of Suleiman the Magnificent, problems began to arise. Suleiman, unfortunately for the empire, had all of his most capable sons executed because he was afraid that they would try to overthrow him. So after Suleiman the Magnificent, the next sultan was nicknamed the Drunk. And remember, the way the Ottoman Empire is set up, if you have a good sultan, everything's fine. If not, problems begin to happen. So Suleiman kills his most capable sons, right? So you end up with Sultan Selim the Drunk after that. The sultans become less involved because they're less involved. Corruption increases. Training of officials decreases. And you have a centuries decline of the Ottoman Empire. It's a slow death. It's not a quick death. Right? The collapse is going to take centuries. Eventually, the Ottoman Empire will be nicknamed the sick man of Europe because everyone else was wondering, when will it finally die? It's a slow death. Now, your book claimed that probably the greatest contribution to art from the Ottoman Empire would be its architecture. Now, it's debatable, but I do happen to agree with your book. They are famous for their domed mosques, right? What's interesting, though, is that their domed mosques were inspired by a Christian church, the Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom, which was a famous church in Constantinople, Istanbul. And when Mehmet II conquered it, he was so impressed by it that he had it turned into a mosque. right? And that domed architecture became a signature of Ottoman mosque. So the mosque that the Ottomans are famous for and were experts at building was inspired by a Christian church. You can go visit the Hagia Sophia today. It's still a mosque, but you can go visit it. And you can even see examples of Christian art left inside of it. And it's pretty cool because it's flooded with natural light. Because in Islam and in Christianity, God, for us, Allah, for Islam, is associated with light. And in both religions, goodness is associated with light. Right? And so they would go on to build their own mosque. This is called the Suleiman Mosque, or the Blue Mosque, because of the blue stone used to construct it. You can see that domed shape, and it allows all that natural light, and you see windows right beneath the dome, and you see the 4 minarets at each corner where they would climb up to the top, and they would announce when it was time for the Muslims to stop and pray. So if you visit an Islamic country today, throughout the day, over loudspeakers throughout those cities, like in Istanbul today, you will hear the call to prayer, and devout Muslims will stop what they're doing and they will face Mecca and they will pray to Allah, which is kind of neat when you stop and think about it. Christians, right, we could learn something from that, right? Spend multiple times a day in prayer to God, right? Once again, listen to other religions. Stick with your own. Be faithful to your own, but don't be a jerk about it. Listen to others. Maybe you'll learn something. Maybe you'll get an idea. In Islam, they also are required to give to the poor. It's one of the pillars of Islam. That's good, right? They're also required to fast a certain amount of times during the year. That's a good idea, right? So don't be so closed-minded. Think about every great empire. It was tolerant. The Romans at first were tolerant. The Ottomans at first were tolerant. Once they became intolerant, then they began to decline.